Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of A Walk to Workout with Whittaker. Today it is the 5th episode of Series 13, Doctor Who Flux, Chapter 5, Survivors of the Flux. And goodness me, this is a bit of a weird one, isn't it? I want to talk about the title first if I can. Now, Survivors of the Flux is an interesting title to me because we're not introduced to really any new characters who are survivors of the Flux. You know, the Doctor, Yaz, Dan, Professor Eustachius, Jericho, Vinda, Bell, Carvanista. They're all people who survived the Flux in earlier episodes. And it makes me wonder if Bell and Vinder's material from last week was originally in this episode. And Bell met a bunch of people who were survivors of the Flux. And we do see them sort of get dissolved to Power, Swarm and Azure's journey into the interstitial area between universes. But I do wonder if this episode might have been better termed just Survivors. But I think there's a Hartnell episode called The Survivors, so I don't know if that would have worked. Now that aside, we launch into 4 plots this episode. And so we have a plot following the Doctor, finding out about her origins, kind of. We've got a plot involving Yaz, Dan and Professor Eustachius Jericho running around 1904, around the world in 80 cuts. We have the Bell plot and sort of the Vinder plot as well. They're kind of linked in together. So I suppose they are 2 plots though, but they very briefly touch when Bell just misses going to the asteroid that she directed Vinder to, and Vinder turns up there. And we have the Grand Serpent plot, insinuating himself into UNIT. Now, in terms of the UNIT plot, I think it's an interesting idea, but the only way I can accept it is if the Grand Serpent is mucking about with time. Just because, you know, we've always been led to believe that Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, then Colonel, was instrumental in setting up UNIT. And here, he's not, and he's a corporal. And it's like, whatever UNIT timeline you believe in, the maximum amount of time between him being a corporal and him being a colonel is 7 years. And it seems unrealistic that he could make that transition from one rank to the other, especially considering one is a commissioned rank, one is a non-commissioned rank. And so I think that's our indication that time's going a bit wrong. There's also the fact that if the Grand Serpent had been around, look, whenever the Pertwee UNIT stories are set, 70s or 80s, the Doctor and Alistair would have sussed him, definitely, for sure. So yeah, there's definitely some time-changing shenanigans going on here. But that's where I think the Grand Serpent kind of makes a mistake. Because the Grand Serpent is an alien. He's detected as being an alien. At which point he could have said, yep, I'm actually here to help you. There are other weirder aliens out there. And he actually could have taken the Doctor's place in the timeline. And I think we could have had some fun with that, you know, inserting him into old footage, have him on the beach with the sea devils, that sort of thing. And it means that he doesn't just kill people the second he's found out, he does actually win them round. Now that being said, the sort of way he kills people and the snake effect are absolutely gorgeous. And of course, he is a psychopath. So, you know, perhaps that sort of subtler approach isn't really for him. I suppose that is more of a master thing to do, insinuating himself in that way. But I think that highlights a problem of this episode, in that everything kind of unfolds the way you would expect it to unfold. You know, we've seen that the Grand Serpent is a mean piece of work in a previous episode, and here he's a mean piece of work. There's no real surprise there. There's no real surprise in the Dan and not Dan and Vinda. There's an insight into how my brain works. But the Bell and Vinder plot, you know, they just miss each other through happenstance. We get an all too brief scene between Bell and Carvanista. And I like that we are now mixing and matching our characters from the different plots, of course, because we've only got, spoiler alert, 1 episode left. But again, there's not much surprising there. And I do like that Vinda gets caught. You know, we've seen that Swarm and Azure seem to be almost omnipotent. And so, of course, they're going to catch Vinda. But they don't just pounce on him. They wait for him to wander around for a bit, because what's the rush? They've got their own stuff that they're doing. They go after him when it's convenient. But speaking of convenience, presumably, they have 2 passenger forms. Presumably they're both empty now, because they've taken all the people they need and absorbed them or whatever. And Vinda happens to end up in the same passenger form as Dai? Or do all the passenger forms link together? But that's not the implication we got in episode 3. Now, I've no objection to Vinda and Dai meeting, and it looks like they're gonna have a bit of an adventure together next week. Look both ways. But yeah, it's just a bit, I hesitate to say predictable, because there are sort of twists aplenty as we're going through this season, but once something happens, you kind of just go, oh yeah, it had to happen that way. Probably the most surprising element of the episode is the Yazdan and Eustatius plot, where they're going around the world to different locations. And it's like, why did they need to go to all these different locations? It's like, because it's fun. This is the most fun part of the episode. And my goodness, Yaz has had more character work in these last 5 episodes than the whole of the last 2 series. And I am very much here for it. I've always thought that Mandip Gill was a very good actress, but she is so showing it this week. And that scene with the hologram, there's very little dialogue from Yaz in that scene compared to how much the Doctor's rabbiting on, but just Mandip sells that scene just with her facial expressions. And also, for Jodie Whittaker, this is a Doctor who doesn't talk about how she's feeling very often. For her to say that she misses Yaz, I thought that was lovely. I've said before, I'm not necessarily a Thazzy, but I'm very glad for those of you who are, that you got that scene. The other thing I quite like is, you know, when they're attacked in their suite, of course, Yaz takes the lead, and she incapacitates the assassin, who, you know, then takes his cyanide capsule or whatever. Now, the thing is, Dan tries to help. I just had a little voice in my ear. Just going to check something. Yep, still recording. I think when I said Thazzy, Siri thought I said Siri. But not when I just said it then. Okay. Dan, you know, does try to help. The Eustachius is immediately knocked out. But it's not sort of played like Dan and Eustachius are completely useless. Because that's one of my pet hates, is when a character is only resourceful because someone else is being an idiot. It's just that Yaz knows what she's doing. She is the more experienced time traveller. And that is, you know, why she is so capable and has been so capable this series. And, you know, we have that brilliant bit in the temple with the up and the down. I really liked the scene with the guru as well. You know, it undermines the audience's expectations. Just gotta check the recording again, because my headphones keep talking to me. So, that plot I really enjoy, and the culmination of that is writing out the message to Carvanista, although I did read someone on Twitter point out, in this time zone they're friends with Nikola Tesla. Surely he can do something about that. But never mind, it's still a great thing, and I was worried that they were going to graffiti the Great Wall of China, but they don't, they just write around it. You know, for no particular reason, but they do it anyway. I really, really enjoyed that. Now, that brings us to the other plot here, which is the Doctor and Tecteun. And this is another area where I wouldn't exactly say it's predictable, but once things happen, you kind of go, oh, yeah, well, that makes sense. And that is when we first met, as she was credited a couple of weeks ago, Orsok. It's kind of like, well, who could she possibly be? And one of the big answers was, well, she's Tecteun, and she ends up being Tecteun. And it's not unsatisfying, but it's kind of like, yep, that is the most obvious answer. That makes sense, and we get on with that. I kind of hoped that Orsok was going to be the frog. I really hoped it was going to be the Solitract. And considering we're moving from one universe into another, I think we could still get an appearance from the Solitract. Maybe. But, even though this scene is kind of what you would expect from the confrontation between the Doctor and Tecteun, it's still really enjoyable, and I think that is down to Jodie Whittaker and Barbara Flynn giving excellent performances. I'm someone who really enjoys putting two actors together and seeing how they interact and how they handle what I think is really quite well-written material. I'm not necessarily on board with the idea that the Doctor would be so affected by not knowing what her past is. But considering that that is the story we're telling, I think this scene does a really good job of furthering that story. There's possibly a little bit too much recap from last year, but that being said, I've had several friends message me and sort of say, hold on, what's this about? Have we seen this before? So maybe we did need that recap. It's very easy for sort of we fans who have the t-shirts, have 250 action figures, have everything on DVD, and then we bought it again on Blu-ray, to kind of go, oh, well, yeah, I knew that. But between the fan and the person who tunes in every 3 weeks, you have people who watch every episode, but they don't go back and re-watch them endlessly. So that needs to be taken into account as well. And, also 8 to 12-year-olds who may have trouble remembering what they saw 18 months ago. They've got the DVD, but they got it for Christmas last year. They watched it 9 months ago, and that's an eternity when you're 8. So I don't necessarily mind the recap there so much, as I expected it to go further. I expected it to dwell on the fact of Tecteun's experiments, but instead, that part of it is just implied, and in a way it's even more disturbing because Chris Chibnall often tells us exactly what the characters are thinking, but instead all the work is done on Jodie's face. And I think that part of the scene is really successful, as is the Doctor appealing to the Ood, and it's also a beautiful set. The visuals this episode are extraordinary. Tecteun has a tree in her, I want to say TARDIS, it's a kind of space station, whatever it is. There's a tree in the middle of it. I absolutely love it. The special effects work has been a real step up this series. The digital effects, even though Yaz, Dan and Eustachius, despite the fact that one of them is a stowaway, seem to be able to get berth on the same boat wherever they go in the world, and it's always from the same angle. But, the effects money this week was spent on the space station. That's fine. It's kind of weird. While I am frustrated by parts of this episode playing out and me going, oh yeah, okay, fair enough, not that big a surprise, fine. Something that was surprising, for instance, was how we see the Weeping Angels travel, and Jodie, again, is excellent in that scene, not only as the Doctor, but the voice of the angels as well. And she's really quite creepy. But even though I'm a bit frustrated, I still found this episode really enjoyable. It's still a 7 out of 10. It's at least on par with episode 3. Might even be a bit better than episode 3, because episode 3 had a lot of illusory stuff, whereas I do feel that this episode does move us towards the finale a bit more. And I should mention we've got Kate Stewart back, but I think she's going to play a bigger part next week. And finally, Joseph Williamson interacts with the plot. And I love his reaction to it, because he's been so taciturn and grumpy throughout the whole thing. But when he realizes that Yaz understands what he's seeing, that's a really touching reaction, because, you know, he's been really dismissive whenever he's run into anyone. But here, as soon as he realizes he's talking to someone who understands and that he's not gone mad, I really love his reaction to Yaz. And it also allows Mandip to show her empathetic side, which is a strength of a character that's been there since day one. So yeah, we're coming to a head next week. I do want to see if Chris Chibnall and co can stick the landing. I have faith that they can, because these episodes have been following the Star Trek The Original Series movies premise of the even-numbered ones are really great, and the odd-numbered ones are odd, experimental, still entertaining, and so this is the equivalent of Star Trek Final Frontier without anyone doing a fan dance. But I'm very interested to hear what you think, so please let me know down in the comments, and we'll meet back here next week for episode 6, The Vanquishers. Now, much like this episode, it's going to be a little bit later. It'll be Wednesday, Australia time, that next week's episode will go up. But until I see you then, do take care of yourselves. Thank you so much for watching, and keep enjoying Doctor Who. See you in a week's time. Bye.